Hi, my name is Susan Fletcher, and I'm the author of Exploring the History of Childhood and Play Through 50 Historic Treasures. This book covers the history of childhood in America, 1840 through 2000, by looking at 50 different toys and games. So today I'm going to be reading my chapter on pinball. On summer afternoons, vintage arcade games keep visitors of all ages entertained for hours at arcade amusements in Manitou Springs, Colorado. One wing of the complex has the oldest games dating back to the early 20th century, including an impressive collection of pinball machines. Players insert nickels and dimes into Jumpin' Jack Flash, the Smart Set, and Honey, and soon the familiar ring of bells and flapping bumpers rings out across the arcade. For budget-conscious and nostalgic viewers, these pinball games are an affordable and fun way to entertain oneself. However, these pinball games weren't always so innocent. They were once the cause of a moral panic in America over the machine's ties to potential gambling and the corruption of youth. The American arcade is more than a century old. Indoor spaces for entertaining youth and grown-ups arose during the late 19th century. According to historian Jeremy Saussure of the Strong Museum of Play, at the end of that century, parlor owners filled their establishments with such novelties of the industrial age, such as phonograph, kinetoscopes, and mutoscopes. However, by the turn of the century, as the novelty of those inventions wore off, many amusement parlors transformed into penny arcades. Soon, pinball games joined the peep shows, penny soccer games, and fake shooting ranges. The concept of pinball originated several centuries ago, having roots in the French game called bagatelle. In 1931, David Gottlieb developed baffleball, followed by Raymond Maloney's ballyhoo in 1932, the first coin-operated pinball game. The early pinball games in the US didn't have flippers to control the ball's movement, so winning a game was left to luck and chance. Guardians of American morality did not like games that were left to luck. They called them games of chance, and they said they smacked of gambling. Pinball flippers were invented until 1947. That year, Dr. Gottlieb and company developed the game Humpty Dumpty, which was the first pinball game to feature the electromechanical flipper bumpers that we're familiar with today. Players could press the buttons to make the flippers spin the ball around, enabling them to manipulate the ball's trajectory. With more interaction from the players and the ability to control what was happening in the game, there was less strength to the argument that these were mere games of chance. Despite these changes, however, parents were still suspicious of pinball games. The early Bally and Williams pinball games had a cash payout at the end. Moral advocates were alarmed that players were winning money for doing absolutely nothing other than putting a coin into a slot. These suspicions did have some merit. According to entertainment historian Daniel Reynolds, in the 1930s and 40s, the pinball industry had strong ties to organized crime. From an industrial standpoint, and in many ways from a law enforcement standpoint, the pinball industry was very much a successor to the slot machine racket. Historian Laura June remarks that cash payouts were quickly abandoned and as it became clear that pinball and gambling weren't a comfortable or legal match. Because pinball games were associated with gambling, adults thought that they were a gateway to hell for their children. If teenage boys started playing pinball, surely it was an open door for them to begin playing pool, poker, wasting all kinds of time, and turning to a life of crime. According to Benjamin Day, president of the Society of the Prevention of Crime in 1942, the pinball is a stepbrother to the slot machine and always has been a heavy contributor to youthful delinquency. The schoolboy who uses his lunch money on a pinball machine frequently steals to make up the deficit. In the words of the musical Music Man, parents thought they had trouble with a capital T that rhymes with P that stands for pinball. So officials all over the country began a crusade against pinball machines. In 1941, these machines were confiscated in New Jersey, and the state Supreme Court decided to weigh in on the morality of these machines. An article in the New York Times declared that the case would determine, quote, the mission of pinball machines in American civilization. The police handled the confiscated pinball machines and hauled them into a courtroom, which irritated the judges. Justice Joseph L. Bodine declared, "You don't have to argue that this is a gambling device. Men and boys are not going to stand around sticking nickels in a wall without getting money back. In this day and generation, it may be that youth has so deteriorated that it has become a practice. But if so, some doctors should place them in an insane asylum and have their heads examined. In January 1942, pinball machines were banned in the states of New York and New Jersey on the basis that they were games of chance. Joseph Persky declared, "The pinball machines involved are nothing but ingeniously designed and purposely constructed mechanical gambling devices to appeal to, induce, lure, and encourage the gaming instinct in the public generally and in children specifically." As evidence of how the machines corrupted American youth, a 16-year-old schoolboy testified that he had skipped school to play pinball machines with his lunch money. In the early 1940s, pinball games faced their greatest enemy, New York City Mayor Fiore LaGuardia. During the chaos of World War II, LaGuardia banned pinball machines in the city, suggesting that the metal, quote, "in these evil machines should be manufactured into arms and bullets which could be used to destroy our foreign enemies." LaGuardia ordered a raid on all the pinball machines. He rounded up the confiscated games and held a press conference where he smashed the offending machines with a sledgehammer. Even if a pinball machine didn't have a cash payout, the concept of getting what we would now call free lives was problematic. In 1949, Circuit Judge Warren L. White of Springfield, Missouri, ruled that pinball machines that gave out free games were gambling devices. The judge wrote, "If the first game is worth 5 cents, is not the second game worth as much? And if the player be so favored by fortune to win a free game, has he not gained something which, except for his good fortune, would have cost him another 5 cents? Even 15 years later, these free lives were problematic. In Clicquot County, Washington, prosecuting attorney Alf Jacobson required pinball owners to put up signs declaring amusement device only, no payoff for free games. As late as the 1970s, pinball was associated with gambling. A Washington, D.C. lawyer on a crusade against the game wrote, "These machines, wherever they go, involve corruption, and they involve corruption for money." An article in the New York Times in 1975 declared that pinball was, quote, "still the devil's game." New York City finally legalized pinball in 1976 after pinball champion Roger Sharp played a demonstration game before the New York City Council, proving that the game was a game of skill, not chance. The council voted unanimously to repeal the ban, and other communities across the country followed. With the rise of other electronic games in arcades and homes, however, in the 1970s and 80s, however, adults still found much to get upset over. In the case of Super Mario Brothers, Tetris, and other games that came into homes. If you guys would like to know more about some of these other electronic games, teddy bears, erector sets, and other toys, you can check out my book, Exploring the History of Childhood and Play Through 50 Historic Treasures. You can also find me online at SusanFletcherCreative.com and on Instagram at SusanFletcherCreative. Thanks.